So you can. Welcome to the conversation. On today's episode, we speak about the issue of parliamentary citizenship as well as the Constitutional Reform Committee. For that particular discussion, we'll have three persons today, two of which are no strangers to you, but the third is a little firebrand among us. We'll speak with Mr. Jermaine Barrett, social and political commentator, as well as Ms. Helene Davis-White, civil union activist, as well as political commentator, and Mr. Peter Townsend, the president of the National Democratic Movement. Welcome to the conversation, one and all. How are you?
Well, I'm well, thanks.
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right, so let's start with you first, Mr. Barrett. A lot has been said, especially in the news of late, about the issue of parliamentary citizenship. I'm asking about impact. I'm talking about impact and precedent. If implemented where you have to swear allegiance solely to Jamaica, how does that affect the current makeup of our parliament, and how might that stymie our efforts of getting selected or, well, viable candidates?
So on the latter part of your question, to what extent does it impact, the pool of potential candidates? Jamaica has, 3 million persons living here on the island approximately, and another 3 million overseas. I'm sure that there are qualified persons on the island who, if mandated to have only a Jamaican citizen, would rise to the occasion, if you will, and would ultimately, serve the country. I'm not sure I'm convinced that, this one person who is an excellent, member of parliament is the only person who would be available. And if it is that we exclude him by virtue of him having dual citizenship, then that's catastrophic. I think there's a fundamental principle that I'd want for us to consider. When you swear allegiance to a foreign power, the narrative oftentimes goes that you're saying, I swear to give true loyal, or to be truly loyal or completely loyal to the particular foreign power. That to me is problematic, because as a legislator, as a leader of the opposition, as the prime minister, for example, you may very well from time to time come upon matters that you have to decide on in the interest of Jamaica to the disadvantage of a foreign power. And it just so happens, thankfully, maybe Jamaica doesn't get into conflicts, that we don't get into wars with other countries. But at least theoretically, principally, it could happen. It could happen, but it doesn't even have to be a state of war. It could be a state of economic tensions between Jamaica and a foreign power. If it is that you have sworn loyalty to that other power, I think their loyalties are divided, and as far as I'm concerned, you are not to be seated in the Parliament of Jamaica.
But what if we're talking about a Commonwealth country, and we are members of the Commonwealth. Why would that be such an issue, considering that we are a member of the shared Commonwealth?
Right. What fundamentally is the difference between Britain and the United States? Why would we want to grant somebody with a British citizenship access to our parliament in terms of being a member of the parliament, but then having been an American, you can't? I think it's ridiculous. A foreign power is a foreign power. We know where that came from. Britain lost its colony and wanted to hold on to it a little bit. So they created this thing called the Commonwealth. It used to be called the British Commonwealth of Nations. Sort of highlighting the fact that Britain still remains the titular head of these countries and is exercising some kind of sovereignty de facto over these countries. We know the trauma and the pain of colonialism and slavery. I don't think that we should be holding on to it. I don't think that we should give Britain that privilege. I think we should, as we pursue this process of constitutional reform, we should be fixed on establishing Jamaican sovereignty and engage in the world, not sharing our loyalties, not having people who have conflict of interest or otherwise. I think we should have people in our parliament who are first and foremost Jamaican, and that's it, full stop.
All right, Mr. Townsend, what are your views on what he has just stated?
Well, I agree with Jermaine to a great extent, but just to point out, because he asked the question, why is it that an American / Jamaican would have an issue, but a Jamaican / British wouldn't have an issue? So as we know, under the current constitutional arrangement, our head of state is King Charles III. So that is how it is for Commonwealth nations like Jamaica, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So once you're in any of those countries, then you are really in one country. So therefore, you're not really a foreigner in terms of the governance structure. And hence, that is why it is legal and legitimate for persons with dual nationality, once it's between Jamaica and a Commonwealth country, including Britain, which is the head of the Commonwealth, it is legally okay. However, I have a problem with that because there is the moral implication and the ethical implication of it, especially if you're aspiring to be the head of state for Jamaica, that has the potential of being a conflict of interest. And I'm hoping that in this round of so-called constitutional reform, that this will be changed so that absolutely no other nationality other than Jamaican nationality should sit in our parliament and should be a head of state of Jamaica.
Mrs. White, Davis White, do you think that there are any moral implications, as Mr. Townsend has just stated, for us to consider?
I think so, because I think Jermaine raised the issue of divided loyalties.
Yes.
And that in itself presents a moral contradiction, so to speak, because at the end of the day, when you swear allegiance to a foreign country, you are Jamaican, you have sworn this allegiance. Whenever decisions are to be made, one would have to ask the question, are you acting in the interest of Jamaica or in the interest of this foreign country to which you have sworn allegiance? So I think while I understand, how we have come to be where we are in respect to the Commonwealth and dual citizenship being allowed for legislators in the context of them being citizens of Commonwealth countries, I think the constitutional reform process that's being undertaken now is the best avenue for us to be able to settle on that issue. Because for me, I need to be assured that whomever is leading Jamaica, whomever is making laws to be applicable to us in Jamaica, must also be operating under those very same laws, yeah? So it can't be that I make decisions that are going to affect us in Jamaica, here in Jamaica, and then I could divorce myself from it and run away from it at some point in time because I have dual citizenship. So for me, this issue is one that should be settled in this era of constitutional reform.
All right. So I've listened to all three of you, and I'm thinking now, especially based on what you had said, Mr. Townsend, the issue of us is one country. So I'm thinking that, let us say that the Commonwealth is Jamaica, and you are from St. Elizabeth, I am from St. Catherine, and you are from St. James, as the case might be. Essentially then, we have made the assumption that the laws are for all members of the Commonwealth. And so what I'm trying to drive at, if it was a case whereby we had freedom of movement and we have all those other niceties that were attached to being members of the Commonwealth, if our outlook would have been the same?
Probably, because we don't have that right now. Because a Jamaican need to get a visa to go to Canada or the UK or Australia, any Commonwealth country, anyway. And so it doesn't exist. We just share one titular head. and we got so-called independence in 1962. So this arrangement, this structure of the monarch being our head of state, it's really on paper and not in practicality. And so that is why it is unworkable to have a situation in which we are seen as one nation, because we are not. Otherwise, we would not need a visa to go to the UK.
All right, I'll just hold you on that thought. We go to our first break. You're watching The Conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break, Jermaine, I wanted to put the same question that I placed to Mr. Townsend to you. What if it was a little different, where we had freedom of movement and all those other niceties attached to being members of the Commonwealth? Would your outlook be the same?
No, it wouldn't change in those circumstances, because you're talking about two sovereign governments laying claim on a single individual. Yes? The fact that the person is Jamaican rather, Jamaica has a claim on that person is loyal, ought to be loyal to Jamaica. But similarly, that person ought to be loyal to that other country as well. And we know in the world of foreign affairs and international relations, oftentimes those matters come into conflict. So I agree with Mr. Townsend that, it's a very messy situation, and I think it does raise some major concerns. A point that I'd want to make, though, is that when we have Jamaicans living such a large number of Jamaicans living overseas, I know many of them are concerned that they are as loyal to Jamaica as anybody else, and they are as committed to Jamaica, and they give as much to Jamaica as anybody else, yes? In fact, many of my friends overseas, they tell me what's happening in Jamaica for long before I even find out, yes? So Jamaicans are committed. But the fact is, your commitment to the country must be such that you are loyal to Jamaica only.
It's beyond reproach.
Not so foreign folks. Beyond question, beyond reproach. And people could say, well, it's just a paper. It's just, we get an additional citizenship for the advantages that I gain. There doesn't mean that I'm loyal to that country. Well, I want for it to be, that at minimum you have only one citizen and nothing else. Even if it is that it doesn't lead to a perfect state, it is a better state than would obtain if we allow dual citizenship.
All right. Mrs. Davis-White, do you think that this somehow might affect the current makeup of Parliament and future political participation? And that's one. And the next one is, do you think we'll just get rid of it because we're bearing the name but not enjoying the benefits of it?
I don't even know what are the benefits that we derive from it. What I do know is that, in governing a country, one has to take into account call it the bona fides of the persons who are governing. And if it is that I have the dual citizenship, whether under whatever arrangement, because for me, the issue of the Commonwealth should be of the past. Yeah, but our new, our revised constitution should at least settle that issue. If it doesn't settle that issue, then I think we're going to have a problem. We also have to take into account that the way the constitutional reform process is being done now, the people, quote unquote, are not being consulted because the arrangements appear to be using the usual word bipartisan. And so if the two political parties agree, then everything is fine and dandy. I don't accept that. It may very well be that I am uncomfortable and unhappy with the situation of dual citizens being allowed as legislators and ultimately as head of state. But if the Jamaicans, if it is put to the Jamaican population and that is what they want, we all have to live with it. I believe that this process of constitutional reform is such that you can allow Jamaicans who will be governed under this constitution to become part of the process. I don't believe the way it's being done now, although we have heard about, various attempts at consultation. I know from where I sit at the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, the Reform Committee did come and have consultations with us. But at the end of the day, I think we would be doing a disservice to Jamaicans. It was done in 1962 because at that point in time, it was said that the majority of the population was illiterate. I don't know that if you are illiterate, you are not able to think. True. But that was the thinking at that time. We have come now to a point where we are, how much, 50 years on?
60 odd years on.
60 odd years on. We must be able to, you know, have that consultation with the people themselves and let the people of Jamaica decide on this very important issue. So it shouldn't only be about CCJ. Yeah? An issue like this, I think, is an important issue that should be put to the people of Jamaica.
Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Enforcement verification. How can or how will or how would we even think about that if I am from, if I enjoy dual citizenship, how do we enforce or verify something like that?
So I think there's not a foolproof mechanism for determining your citizenship. I think at the point at which you're being nominated for the post of member of parliament or so, that you should be asked to swear an oath. Yes? Committing, stating categorically to the best of your knowledge, you have but one citizenship, that being a Jamaican citizenship. Is that a perfect approach? Is that approach going to ensure that nobody with dual citizenship don't try to cheat the system? No. But what it does, you see, it creates a significant disincentive for such persons to do so, because the point at which, through any means, it is found out, it is determined that, you know, John Doe, who swore that he has only Jamaican citizenship, has another citizenship as well, then it is scandalous and it is ruinous to his political and personal fortunes, you know? So I think that is a strong enough incentive, coupled with whatever other mechanisms can be introduced to safeguard the integrity of our parliament.
Oh, thank you. So, Mr. Townsend, I'm thinking that it would make sense to pull out your views on the idea of national security. Are you of the opinion that sole allegiance strengthens national security by preventing what we might call divided loyalties in terms of critical decision making?
Well, whoever is Prime Minister of Jamaica usually wears the hat of Minister of Defense. So, and that person is in charge of our army. And so that sole loyalty, that single loyalty to country must be of serious concern. There's no way there should be a split loyalty over in the minds of people who are heading such a sensitive and serious position. So I believe that national security, even though, as I said earlier, we don't expect Jamaica to be fighting any wars, but anything can happen, and wars come in many forms. You have economic, you have trade wars, and so forth.
Mr. Barrett was saying that earlier.
Yes, but I believe that it's a no-brainer in terms of the loyalty aspect of it. And should I say I'm surprised? But then again, I'm not surprised that this wasn't even thought out by the Constitutional Reform Committee, which just goes to show you that if they had consulted the people, this probably would have come out. Ironically, this thing has blown up recently, and it came out after they have released their document, finally, as to what it is that they are proposing. And this was not even in their consideration. So they're on their incremental thinking from 1962 to now of making these cosmetic changes to the Westminster model to give themselves and to keep the power in their hands and not in the people's hands. They haven't even thought out the whole matter that we should be moving away from this thing of Commonwealth citizens being able to sit in our parliament or to sit in Jamaica House. It goes to show you they should have consulted the people. They think they're either too smart than the rest of us, or they are so contemptuous of the people of Jamaica.
Or is it that they might not be sure how to communicate? Because you spoke, well, both of you spoke to the extent that you don't think there are enough. You can correct me if I'm wrong. There hasn't been enough consultations, or are you saying that there were no consultations, real consultation?
There was no real consultation. Well, as Helen said, she presented her group. I also presented at Jamaica House on behalf of the NDM with regards to our constitutional proposal. But from the comments then, their minds were decided that to think of an executive president and term limits and those things were too radical, and that they want incremental changes. So it hasn't come as a surprise, the things that they have put forward. And also the fact that they have not even included the whole matter of this citizenship status to sit in our parliament and to be a head of state. It goes to show you that the consultations were totally and woefully inadequate. If there was any consultation, if you can call it that, it was just too little consultation. Let me give them some credit to say that there were some consultations. It was woefully
inadequate.
Too little, yeah.
Mr. Barrett, what are your views on that? You think there are sufficient consultations, or do you think that there should have been far more?
Not at all, not at all. For something as monumental as a constitutional reform process, it needed to have involved far more Jamaicans engaged in the discussion, in the dialogue, in sharing their opinions. One of the things I want us to appreciate, you see, is that those who are part of the political elite, there is a particular kind of relationship that these people have in terms of matters in relation to other countries and so forth, and citizenship and so forth. In other words, the concentration of persons within the political elite, within the upper echelons of society who have dual citizenship is far more than those who exist at the bottom of the society. And so it is not shocking to me that an output of the committee, which is made up of political and social elites, would effectively not speak about abolishing an arrangement whereby somebody can sit in the parliament with the dual citizenship.
Are you
well said, Jeremy.
Are you saying that is an uptown phenomenon? That's what you're saying, where most of the dual citizens are uptown?
But that's precisely it is, and that is undebatable. Yes. And so if you had engaged Jamaicans to a larger extent, more fulsomely, you'd find that the vast majority of Jamaicans would say, no, I don't want that. I think that my view is, because we don't have any empirical data to say what Jamaicans think, but I think that in as much as Jamaicans aren't conflicted by that reality in terms of how it is that they are set up in terms of their own the duality of citizenship, it is not as concentrated elsewhere in the society. Yes, people would likely push back. But it's not in the interest of these the political elite to do so.
So are you then saying though that there are, so the document presents the bias of a few? That's what you're saying, no? Because based on what you have just said earlier and what has been implied, it would suggest that there's a bias there, and the bias is strongly representative of a minority.
Okay. Precise. And I think there's another one as well. Why aren't we having an executive president, right? I'm not firm on this view, but just from interacting with average Jamaicans, I've come to appreciate that the average Jamaican is of the view that why we have spent money, millions of dollars to upkeep the Governor General, which would basically become rubber stamped as the president. For what? What are we getting from it? Yes? And the response from the committee is, in spaces where when they engage on that question is, well, we need a ceremonial head. We need somebody to be the symbol of national unity. Jamaicans don't understand that fully. And so it's either that you're going to engage in a robust conversation with Jamaicans to persuade them that that is best, or you do what the people of Jamaica would want you to do because we are a democratic society.
All right, so on that we go to our second break. You're watching The Conversation. We're looking at issues of parliamentary citizenship and now the role of a proposed president. Continue to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. So just before the break, Jermaine, you were talking to us about the role of the executive president, and I think Mr. Townsend, as well as Helen Davis White, has some issues with that. I'm not sure the extent of the issues that they might have. So I'll throw to Mrs. White first, Davis White first, to find out what are her views. What are your views on the issue of an executive president vis-a-vis a ceremonial president?
My view is that, if we're talking about true reform, we need to make a decision there. My personal preference would be for an executive president because I think as a lot of persons, and especially young people, they come to this conversation wanting to know that they have played a part in electing who their head of state is. We have seen it in Portmore to a certain extent, where you have the elected mayor, and people have actually adopted that and owned that. And in fact, that came as a result of the consultations that were held in Portmore, and people decided that they wanted a directly elected mayor. I would bet you 100% that if that vote is put to the Jamaican people, that we would have the vast majority wanting to have a say in who is the head of state for Jamaica. My personal preference is for an executive president. I don't think it makes sense. What would we be spending money to keep somebody in, you can almost say, opulent circumstances? For what reason? What do we gain from that? You know what happened in the case of the Governor General. He was a Queen's representative here. And so that's why we had him. If we now are talking about actually fashioning a Jamaican-style constitution, it should be reflecting what the people of Jamaica want. And as I think it has been stated that there have been polls that have indicated clearly that this is what the Jamaicans want.
So, so while I hear what you're saying, though, you know, we generally tend to look at the Governor General just being the Queen's representative here, but in some real sense of the word, he's the head of state by virtue of that. Yes. So then, when we look at Portmore, for example, where you directly elect someone to fill that particular role, you are somehow saying that if that was put to the rest of Jamaica, that's the decision that they would have made. But couldn't it be that they might not, because they don't know what it means? We just know that, yes, to directly elect persons, but what are the entitlements to this person? What comes with the post? What are those things? Because I'm not sure we're doing enough public education campaigns for that. So
you nail on the head. We need to have the public education of the people and let them choose between ceremonial and executive president. I am in favor of executive presidency. And in support of what Helene just said a while ago, the RJR communication, Gleaner RJR communication groups did a poll which was carried out by Market Research Limited, Don Anderson, in September 2023. And it revealed that 78% of Jamaicans are in preference of an executive-style president. And the ceremonial was, I think, about 9%, and the difference was didn't know. So it's overwhelming. And these people who are doing their consultations, right, so-called, and these are the people who use the pollsters at election time, but yet they have ignored the sentiments of the people to the extent that they have not even included that as an option for the people to choose in a referendum, well, and to educate them on it. That
seemed to be playing into the biases that you and Jermaine suggested earlier. But
there is a bias.
So, question for you though, Jermaine, and well, firstly for you, and then for the other panelists here. It was one of the things that was stated in the constitutional reform document was that we would have an executive president by way of secret ballots, meaning that the MPs would have had that opportunity to choose.
You mean a non-executive president?
Non-executive.
A non-executive, rather. And they would be able to choose on our behalf. What is so wrong with that particular notion or that approach?
Listen, you're stirring up an answer here, because I have a fundamental problem with that as well. When I, as a constituent, elect my member of parliament, and that's the person who I select happens to, ascend to the parliament, that person, in my mind, in a democratic structure, should be voting in conformity with the majority, with the consensus of the constituency. When we allow that person to vote in a secret ballot, that person cannot be held accountable for his vote. For all we know, all sorts of, inducement may be placed under the table. I'm not saying that I have evidence of this, but I want to know that if I vote for John Doe, and John Doe is my member of parliament, I can look and see how John Doe votes, and I can engage John Doe in a robust process. I think that if it is as well, John Doe, before John Doe goes and makes it an essential vote, John Doe needs to engage the constituents and say, listen, man, there are two candidates here for president. Here is the resume for either candidate. Engage, discuss, tell me which one you want to be the president, and then go and reflect the people's decision in the parliament.
But
so I'm very much opposed to a secret vote.
Wow. But to your point, you know, the argument that came along with this particular statement was that it would reduce the whole idea of bipartisanship. So what are you saying? Are you saying that it's partisan? Well, the partisanship. Are you saying then that, one, it's playing more to the biases that are currently existing, and two, persons are not being able to, you can't hold them accountable, and a number of other things I'm hearing? Clarify.
I don't live in I live in the realm of real politics. I don't live in sort of a hypothetical kind of conjuring, theoretical realm. When we talk about somebody who is of national unity and that kind of a thing. Look at our Governor General. If the president is effectively the Governor General renamed, then I think we have enough evidence to say to what extent, when this country has been faced with political tensions, conflicts, JLP versus PNP at war, to what extent is the Governor General effective at bringing the parties together and resolving the matters? To what extent are Jamaicans looking at our Governor General as a symbol of unity? And, when the Governor General speaks, the warring factions stop, they listen, and they say, yes, Gigi, you make sense. I think I'm going to yield to your wisdom. That just does not exist. And so why are we now perpetrating that kind of reality into the new Jamaican constitution, just renaming it?
So who would be a good non-executive president, in your opinion?
I don't know that there's a good non-executive president for our context. I think we need to recognize that we ought to be efficient in terms of how we administer the governance of this country, and every single dollar spent must be money well spent. I don't see that we're getting value from a non-executive president.
All right. So we heard from the People's National Party, the leader of the opposition, that we should just move away. That's the impression that we get. Move away from the monarchy. We need to have our own appellate court, the CCJ rather. What are your views on that?
Again...
Well, go ahead. Sorry. You go ahead, my friend.
Well, again, the same principle exists. We need to factor in what the people want and not just what the elites alone want. And in the same way, I mean, I know we have just moved from that point, but the fact that they could want to have a secret ballot for their ceremonial president among themselves.
So you're in alignment with Mr. Honey's recommendation then that we go to a referendum for the final appellate court?
That's not Mr. Honey's position as far as I know. Mr. Honey has not been saying it in that last tit-for-tat between himself and Mr. Golding. But if you listen to his Minister of Constitutional Affairs...
He has said it.
Well, in terms of that aspect of it, I'm saying that the people should be educated. Let me say up front that I'm pro-CCJ. However, I do not believe that in a democracy and and where we're supposed to have accountability and transparency, we should ram things on the people's throat, whether it be Privy Council or CCJ. We should educate the people on both options and let them vote on that ballot on the referendum as to what is their final appellate court. And Trinidad has become a republic, but they have chosen to still keep the Privy Council, and the people can do both. I don't believe in that formula. I believe that the people should choose in a referendum, and whichever one we settle on, it should be the one that we go forward with.
Helen
it's
Davis
different from Mr. Holney's position, because Mr. Holney is even talking about a local appellate court. Okay. Mr. Holney is just trying to muddy the water.
No, the Prime Minister has said that, you know. So it's a referendum.
Yes.
He wants to put it to a referendum, and that would be among the choices. So if it's ours, then we use that.
Yes.
So there's the local court, there's the CCJ, and the UK Privy Council. Whatever the people are you of that view? That's the Prime Minister's view.
No, well, I am for the people being allowed to take part in the decisions that affect them. Yeah? And so for that reason, I would be in favor of a referendum. There is a view that based on how our politics operate, a referendum would really be PNP, JLP issue. And so But I think we have an obligation to properly educate persons so that they can make that decision. And if we're going the route of a referendum, it shouldn't only be on the CCJ, it should be on all these other
Yes.
issues, because it would be a waste of money to go on that and leave the others.
Thank you.
So we
All right.
need to identify those issues that on which we believe the Jamaican population should be involved in that decision.
All right, so hold that thought. We go to our final break. You are watching The Conversation. We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break, we looked at a number of things. And one of the questions that I want to ask, question as it relates to the issue of the tit for tat, the seeming tit for tat now between both the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister. Do you think that they're playing that so that we can stretch out this whole thing, and it might just be a case where because the leader of the opposition, or better yet, the PNP is not in charge of this process, where they want to stretch it beyond where it currently is? Are you of that opinion, Mr. Barrett?
So, I have my private views on this matter. It's a public platform, so I'll hold my private views, except to say, though, that as people who are tasked with leading the political affairs of this country, they need to be more mature. They need to be more mature, yes? There is a point at which, given the fact that we're dealing with something as important as constitutional reform, which requires a sort of a bipartisan arrangement with the people as well involved central to that whole process, I don't like this idea of holding the process hostage by saying, well, if it is that you're not going to give me what I want vis-a-vis the CCJ, then it's no progress. Nothing is to be had. I as much as I would have wanted a shift to the CCJ, I also much appreciate the fact that the process requires some give and take and engagement with the people. It has to be long, it has to be intense. And ultimately, if it is that we're at a stage where there's agreement about us moving from the British monarchy and establishing a truer Jamaican kind of sovereignty, then let's take that and continue the work towards building an even stronger and proper constitution. That's my preference.
All right. Ellen Davis-White, Prime Minister Holness emphasizes Jamaica's sovereignty and reflecting the will and aspirations of the people. Are you able to say how becoming a republic specifically fulfill these aspirations?
Well, for me, becoming a republic of whatever sort is really about us being able to manage our own affairs as against what has been happening since quote-unquote independence, where we have been operating with a foreign, call it that, for me, head of state in either the king or the queen. So for me, and I think for a lot of Jamaicans, what this is really about is us being able to look at our head of state and identify with the head of state, because the head of state would be somebody with, who would basically be representing us as people. So for me, that is really what a republic signifies for us, so that we are not any longer bound to the British model, and where we have our head of state coming from Britain, but we are in fact in charge of our own destiny, so to speak. And so that is really what it connotes for me, and I would believe that's what it connotes for a lot of Jamaicans, because, I believe if we are still teaching civics in schools, a lot more Jamaicans would understand the difference and what it is that we are trying that we're trying to achieve and have been trying to achieve for many years. This issue of constitutional reform, from in my very young days in the 1970s, it started. And we are still where we are. And it seems like we're going to want to kick the can down the road again. I think we have come to a point now where there are some issues that we need to decide. And the approach that has been taken, Mrs. Malahoo Fort identified that they had agreed, both parties had agreed to this phased approach. I think, you know, the phased approach may serve a particular end in terms of, you know, not too much change at any one time. But I believe if you're actually moving to change now, I think you should be looking at these very important issues and not leave them for some way down the road, because that's what they're...
Another 60 years.
Another, probably more than that.
So with the phased approach that was mentioned, Mr. Townsend, do you think that there are some potential drawbacks or challenges that might arise from this transition process?
Jamaica suffered under slavery, under imperialism and colonialism. And it is a shame that in 2024, Jamaica's head of state is King Charles III, his heirs and successors. We ought to move away from that arrangement. We ought to become a republic where we have our own head of state. Now, in terms of the process that they have embarked upon, this incremental change is unacceptable. These incremental changes, for the most part, preserves the Westminster model and keep the vestiges of the British colonialism still in our faces. So if we are traumatized from slavery and colonialism, we would still remain so, because the Westminster model, it still leaves the enormous power concentrated in the hands of the Prime Minister, whoever that is. And with a figurehead, head of state, that this very Prime Minister appoints and rubber stamped by the Parliament in a secret ballot, nothing would have changed. Nothing would have changed. And so that is, this incremental piecemeal change is totally unacceptable. We need to have proper wholesale change. If we're going to be a republic, let's be a real republic, not a sham republic.
Mr. Barrett, do you think that both members of the both political sides of the divide, if they are afraid to actually engage the public in meaningful discussions to ensure that we get the changes that the other two panelists are talking about, do you think that they're afraid?
Helen said it earlier on that when we enacted and implemented the Jamaican Constitution under which we're governed now, there was a sense that Jamaicans were illiterate and couldn't be engaged in a meaningful discussion on what it is that we wanted our Constitution to look like. I think that sort of tendency still exists within our politics, the kind of tendency of politicians to, fight it out among themselves and leave Jamaicans who are too childish, not able to deal with these heavy issues on the sidelines to watch. You see it even in terms of how it is that the committee has conducted their business, telling us that, we have to be candid with each other in the deliberations, and that candidness is important, but that cannot be exposed to the people at large. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. This is a filmy constitution. You have no greater role to play in the shaping of it than I do.
So do you think that they are being arrogant in their approach then? Both political parties are being arrogant in their approach?
It is arrogance. It is arrogance. It is bare-faced arrogance, right? And so I don't get the sense that they're listening. They do these kinds of, every now and then they have 5 town hall meetings and so forth. Listen, the whole country should be engaged in a conversation. Every single thing that we are about during this period should be about discussing, deliberating, chewing out the details of this constitution as one common Jamaican family. That has not happened, and we know why. It's about securing their privilege.
So the role of the parties now and the civil societies, what role can the political parties and civil society organizations play in fostering what we can call a productive national conversation on the issue of the reform and then some? I'll throw that to you first.
I think there is a clear role for the political parties and civil society groups, yeah? But in this particular instance, when we're talking about our Constitution, I believe there should be more effort to have these discussions in a fashion that, quote unquote, ordinary Jamaicans can access those discussions. This idea that, you know, people are not able to think about these, you know, very serious issues and form opinions and what have you, I think we need to have some confidence in the people. The role of the civil society groups, I believe, would be to help in that process of being able to, you know, have that information sharing about what this process is and how can you participate in this process. So that, to me, is the main role of the civil society groups and even the political parties. But at the end of the day, when we should be able to come out of those consultations with some specific points, and for us to be able, what is it that you would want in a Jamaican constitution? And for us to be able to itemize and come down to, you know, sort of distill it so that you can come down to specific issues, and we see the extent to which those issues can be taken on board, and then we develop a process as to how we would reform the constitution to take those issues into account. The issues, I think, have to come from the people.
All right, so to you gentlemen, we have removed the king, vote or directly elect an executive president, replace the final appellate court. Are there any other issues that you think that the Constitutional Reform Committee should be addressing now that they might not be paying much attention to?
I think, for example, participatory budgeting is something that ought to be made constitutional. How we, for example, spend the resources of this country without necessarily engaging the people in terms of the expenditure is a major concern for me. There are issues surrounding things like abortion, things like, you know, very many controversial matters that we need to also be thinking about and engaging with, right? So, you know, the reform of the Constitution is not ever going to be something that is ever done, right? America has gone through centuries as a nation state, and they still have debates raging about what it means to be American and what are the value systems that govern them. And I think that will forever be our case, you know. So as societies evolve, values change, ideologies change. There's a continual pull and tug within the society. That is good. That is how democracies work. We shouldn't shy away from it.
Mr. Townsend?
Well, I share Jermaine's sentiments that there are a lot of important issues. We're not going to get everything all done at the same time, but I believe some fundamental ones need to be dealt with now. The so-called bipartisanship, the so-called consensus between the PNP and JLP being good enough, it's unacceptable, and that is why we need a consultation process so that we can broaden what are the people's priorities. Because things like having fixed election dates, term limits, the whole matter of hanging, abortion, just to name a few, are things that should be put on a ballot even when we have a regular general elections for people to make decisions on. There are just too much situations in which these leaders who earlier on Jermaine was saying that it was arrogance, which I think it's more contempt, because these people who concoct things like undated resignation letters and garrison politics, we can't trust them to decide what are our priorities. And these people also who took civics off the curriculum. How could you take civics off the curriculum of the country? If we were still teaching civics for the 20-odd years that they took it off, people would be in a more receptive position to understand what we are now doing. And then these people who took it off the curriculum had the nerve to talk about the people not being literate enough and having the understanding to have a proper discussion and to make suggestions where our constitutional reform is. I dare say they are contemptuous of the people of Jamaica.
Outside of the arrogance or contempt, as you put it, Do you think that there might be legitimate fears or concerns about us becoming a republic, moving away from the monarchy? Are there other things that we might be afraid of in terms of the relationships that we currently have? Do you think we need to consider those are legitimate concerns? I'll start with you first, Helen Davis-White.
Well, I certainly can't identify those as legitimate concerns, yeah? Because at the end of the day, if it is that we have a system that, you know, we had come to accept over the years, clearly that system is not delivering for us, yeah? And if it isn't delivering for us, I don't know why we would have a concern about changing the system. And I believe that, you know, if we do it the right and proper way, we will be able to get the views of Jamaicans as to whether or not the current system that we have is fit for purpose in terms of where we are situated in the world today, and whether it is fit also for Jamaicans generally. We just need to get down to that, and I think, you know, having done that, we'd be able to distill all of the issues that persons may have and they may want to have dealt with in the process of constitutional reform.
All right, so with that, we can complete the conversation. So there you have it. You have the views of a wide cross-section of persons, political commentators, the head of a political party, and then some. You have been given a bit of knowledge, a bit more, hopefully, than the start of this program. So until such time, I am Kwame Thomas, and this has been The Conversation. Thank you for being here.